Marcus Delaney walked onto the Family Feud stage at 9:58 a.m. on a Thursday taping in Atlanta, carrying a folded American flag, triangular, in a presentation case made of walnut and glass. He was 41 years old, a former Army Staff Sergeant with 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq, now working as a high school guidance counselor in Richmond, Virginia. The flag in the presentation case had flown over Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khost Province, Afghanistan, on April 14, 2011, the day Marcus Delaney should have died, and did not. What had happened that day, and what Marcus had decided to do with the flag he had kept for 15 years because of what had happened, was the reason he had applied to be on Family Feud 9 months earlier. He had not told his family why. He had not told his wife. He had told only one person, a Family Feud producer named Gwen Morehouse, in a phone call in June 2025. He had asked Gwen if she could do him a very specific favor. He had asked her if the show could arrange for a particular woman to be in the audience on the day his family taped, without Marcus's family knowing, and without the woman herself knowing why she had been invited. Gwen had spent 4 months tracking the woman down. She was 78 years old, retired, living alone in a small apartment in Lynchburg, Virginia, 3 hours south of Richmond. Her name was Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton. She had been Marcus Delaney's 7th-grade English teacher at Robert E. Lee Middle School in Lynchburg from 1996 to 1997. Gwen Morehouse had called Mrs. Pemberton in October 2025 and had invited her, with her expenses covered, to attend a Family Feud taping as a guest of the foundation. Mrs. Pemberton had agreed because she had not left her apartment for anything other than groceries and church in 6 years, and because her only daughter had died in 2019, and because a free trip to Atlanta sounded, in her own words, like the closest thing to an adventure I have left in me. Mrs. Pemberton had not been told that a former student of hers would be on the stage. She had been seated in the front row of the audience at 9:30 a.m. on that Thursday morning, holding a small program book the usher had given her, looking with mild interest at the stage lights and the cameras, completely unaware that the man she had talked to read at age 12 was about to walk onto that stage carrying a folded American flag for her, and what Marcus Delaney would do during the 4th face-off question of that taping, when he would stop the game, walk to the edge of the stage, and ask Steve Harvey for permission to change the show's entire schedule, would be watched by 389 million people across 40 countries, and would trigger a nationwide movement called the Teacher Thank You Project, through which more than 240,000 Americans would track down and thank teachers who had changed their lives. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. The taping was scheduled for Thursday, October 29, 2026, at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta, Georgia. The Delaney family had driven down from Richmond the night before, 6 of them in a rented minivan. Marcus, his wife Tamara, their 2 children Eli and Simone, Marcus's older brother Andre, and Andre's wife Yolanda. 5 would be on stage. Yolanda would be in the audience. Their opponents were the Reyes family from Phoenix, Arizona, a multi-generational family of 5, led by a retired firefighter named Rodrigo, who had served his city for 34 years. The 2 families had met in the green room at 7:45 a.m. Rodrigo Reyes had noticed the wooden presentation case Marcus carried carefully under one arm. He had not asked about it. Firefighters and soldiers, in Rodrigo's experience, carried things for reasons they would explain when they were ready to explain them. Marcus had noticed Rodrigo noticing. The 2 men had nodded at each other across the green room in a silent acknowledgement of something neither of them needed to put into words. Marcus's wife, Tamara, had not asked about the flag case either, even though she had watched him carry it carefully onto the plane from Richmond to Atlanta, and had watched him place it on the hotel dresser that night, and had watched him carry it into the studio that morning. She knew not to ask. She had known, for 11 years of marriage, that Marcus would tell her when he was ready. He had told her 2 weeks before the trip that he would be bringing something from Afghanistan with him. She had not pressed for details. She had simply said, "Okay." On April 14, 2011, Marcus Delaney had been 26 years old, a staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division, stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khost Province, Afghanistan. The base was small, remote, and had been the target of a devastating suicide bombing 15 months earlier that had killed 7 CIA officers. On the morning of April 14th, Marcus had been scheduled for a routine vehicle patrol through 3 nearby villages, a patrol he had completed more than 40 times during his deployment. At approximately 6:15 a.m., while preparing his kit for the patrol, Marcus had received a handwritten letter in the incoming mail from Lynchburg, Virginia. The letter was from Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton, his 7th grade English teacher, whom he had not seen or spoken to in 14 years. She had tracked him down through his mother, who still lived in Lynchburg. The letter was 2 pages long. She had written it on lined yellow paper in her careful cursive handwriting. She had told Marcus that she had seen his name in the local newspaper on a list of service members from Lynchburg deployed overseas, and that she had wanted to write to him because she was 63 years old, and she had thought about him often over the years. She had told him she remembered the day in October 1996 when she had realized he could not read. He had been in her 7th grade English class. She had realized it quietly during a group reading exercise, and she had not embarrassed him in front of the other students. She had instead asked him to stay after class and had said, "Marcus, I think you and I have some work to do together, and I think we are going to do it." She had worked with him after school for an hour every Tuesday and Thursday for the entire academic year. She had taught him to read. He had ended the year reading at a 10th grade level. In the letter, she wrote that she had never forgotten the look on his face the day he finished reading his first full novel, which had been To Kill a Mockingbird, on a Tuesday afternoon in April 1997. She wrote that she was proud of him and that she was praying for him and that she wanted him to know, in case anything happened, that he had been one of the most important students of her 41-year teaching career. Marcus had read the letter 3 times at the small folding table in his barracks at 6:17 a.m. He had folded it carefully and placed it in the chest pocket of his uniform over his left breast. At 6:30 a.m., he had reported for his patrol briefing. At 6:45 a.m., he had climbed into the lead vehicle, a Humvee, with his team of 3 other soldiers. At 7:13 a.m., 12 miles outside the base, on a stretch of road they had driven 40 times before, an improvised explosive device had detonated beneath the lead Humvee. The blast had flipped the vehicle. 2 of Marcus's soldiers, Specialist Joshua Reed from Minnesota and Corporal Anthony Vega from Texas, had died instantly. The third, Sergeant Kwame Okafor from Georgia, had been critically wounded and had died 3 days later at Bagram Air Base. Marcus Delaney had been the only survivor. He had regained consciousness 4 minutes after the blast, with his uniform on fire, his left leg broken, and shrapnel embedded in the left side of his chest. The shrapnel had penetrated his body armor at an angle. The path of the largest fragment had been deflected by something in his chest pocket. When the medical team at Bagram had examined him 14 hours later, they had found Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton's folded letter in his chest pocket, soaked with blood, with a jagged 2-inch piece of metal shrapnel embedded in the top layer of the folded pages. The letter had slowed the shrapnel enough that it had not reached Marcus's heart. The trauma surgeon at Bagram, a major named Elena Vasquez, had told Marcus, when he was conscious enough to understand her, that without something dense in that exact pocket, the shrapnel's trajectory would have reached his left ventricle. She had said the letter, in her professional opinion, had been the difference between surviving and not surviving. Marcus had kept the letter. The letter was now encased in a small glass frame in his home office in Richmond. The shrapnel had been extracted from it by a conservation specialist in 2013, and the fragment itself was mounted separately in a small shadow box above the letter. Marcus had never told Mrs. Pemberton what her letter had done. He had not known how. He had tried to write to her 3 times in 2011 and 2012, in the months after his medical discharge, and he had not been able to finish any of the letters. He had been 26 years old, and he had not known how to say, in words, that a woman who had taught him to read when he was 12 had also kept him alive when he was 26, through the simple mass and density of 2 folded pages of lined yellow paper. He had decided, in 2013, that he would thank her in person someday. But then his transition out of the Army had been difficult. He had struggled for 2 years with PTSD. He had started drinking. He had lost a job. He had met Tamara in 2014, and she had slowly, patiently helped him rebuild. He had gone to counseling. He had gotten sober. He had gone back to school on the GI Bill and earned a master's degree in counseling. He had started his career as a guidance counselor in 2018. He had intended, every year from 2011 onward, to drive down to Lynchburg and find Mrs. Pemberton and thank her in person. Every year for 15 years, something had come up. He had let it slide. He had told himself, next year. He had repeated that sentence to himself 15 times. And that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. In June 2025, Marcus had been at a graduation ceremony at his high school in Richmond. He had watched a 17-year-old student named Deshaun Williams, a boy he had counseled for 3 years, walk across the stage to accept a diploma that Deshaun's parents had not believed he would ever receive. Deshaun had thanked Marcus from the podium. He had said, in front of 800 people, that Mr. Delaney had been the reason he had not dropped out of school in the 10th grade. Marcus had sat in the 3rd row of the auditorium, weeping quietly, and his wife Tamara had held his hand. And Marcus had realized, sitting there in that auditorium, that 16 years after he had first planned to thank Mrs. Pemberton, he had built an entire career around doing for other young people what she had done for him. And he had never told her about it, and she was now 78 years old, and she was not going to live forever. And if he did not do this soon, he was not going to do this at all. The realization had been so sharp that he had stood up from his seat in the middle of the graduation ceremony, walked out to the hallway, and called the Family Feud application line from a payphone in the school lobby. He had been put on hold for 14 minutes. He had not hung up. When the application coordinator had finally answered, Marcus had said, "Ma'am, my family would like to apply to be on your show, and I have a very specific reason why. Would you have a moment for me to explain?" The coordinator, a woman named Gwen Morehouse, had said yes. Marcus had told Gwen Morehouse the entire story: the IED, the letter, the shrapnel, the 15 years of not calling, the realization in the school auditorium. He had told her that he would like, if the show could manage it, to arrange for Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton to be in the audience for his family's taping. He would like to thank her in person, live, on the stage, with his wife and his children and his brother and his country, and the cameras all watching. He had said, "Ma'am, I should have done this 15 years ago. I am asking your show to help me do it now, before it's too late." Gwen Morehouse, on the other end of the phone, had not spoken for about 10 seconds. Then she had said, quietly, "Sergeant Delaney, I would be honored." But Marcus Delaney was carrying a secret that would soon change everything. Gwen Morehouse had spent 4 months locating Mrs. Pemberton. She had gone through Lynchburg School District records, retired Teacher Association files, and finally through a database of state teaching license renewals. She had found Mrs. Pemberton living alone in a small second-floor apartment in Lynchburg. Mrs. Pemberton's only daughter, Priscilla, had died of ovarian cancer in 2019. Her husband, a quiet Methodist deacon named Reginald Pemberton, had died of a heart attack in 2011, 3 months after she had written the letter to Marcus. Mrs. Pemberton was alone. She lived on a small pension. She had arthritis in both hands. She had not traveled outside Lynchburg since 2020. She had a niece in Roanoke who visited her once a month. That was the extent of her surviving social world. Gwen Morehouse had called her in October 2025 and had told her that the Family Feud production team would like to invite her to a taping in Atlanta as a special guest of the show, with all expenses covered, including a first-class flight and a 3-night stay at the Ritz-Carlton. Mrs. Pemberton had asked why. Gwen had said, truthfully but incompletely, "Ma'am, a former student of yours who has gone on to accomplish a great deal has asked that we invite you. He did not want you to know who he was until you arrived, if that is acceptable to you." Mrs. Pemberton had been silent for a long moment on the phone. Then she had said, in a voice Gwen Morehouse would later describe to her colleagues as the voice of a woman who had not been surprised by something good in a long time, "Young lady, I taught for 41 years. I have had a great many students. I cannot imagine which one is asking. But if you are telling me one of them remembered me, I will come to Atlanta. Yes." Mrs. Pemberton had flown to Atlanta on the evening of Wednesday, October 28, 2026. She had been picked up at the airport by a Foundation driver. She had been driven to the Ritz-Carlton on 14th Street. She had been given a quiet dinner in the hotel restaurant. She had slept in a room larger than her entire Lynchburg apartment. She had woken at 6 a.m. on Thursday morning. She had dressed carefully in her best navy blue dress, which she had owned since 2004, and which she had not worn since Priscilla's funeral in 2019. She had been driven to the studio at 8:45 a.m. She had been escorted to a reserved seat in the front row of the audience. She had been given a small program book. She had sat quietly in her seat, looking at the stage, wondering which former student had invited her. She had gone through several possibilities in her mind. She had not thought of Marcus Delaney. She had not seen his name since 1997. She had not known he had gone to Afghanistan. She had not known he had become a guidance counselor. She had not known he had kept her letter in his pocket on the morning of April 14, 2011. The taping began at 9:45 a.m. The two families walked onto the set. Marcus Delaney carried the wooden presentation case with the folded flag under his right arm. He did not speak about it. He did not look out into the audience. He knew Mrs. Pemberton was there. He had been told in the green room 40 minutes earlier by Gwen Morehouse. He had asked Gwen, with a voice that was not entirely steady, which row she was in. Gwen had said, "Front row, seat 11, navy blue dress." Marcus had nodded. He had not looked toward the audience since walking onto the stage. He had been afraid that if he saw her, he would not be able to make it through the first 3 rounds of the game. He had told Gwen in the green room that he would make his move during the 4th face-off. He needed 3 rounds to steady himself. Gwen had said that was fine. She had not told Steve Harvey. She had not told any producer other than the executive producer and one camera operator. Steve Harvey did not know. This was deliberate. Marcus had asked Gwen to keep it that way because he wanted Steve's reaction to be real. Steve Harvey introduced both families. He got to Marcus. He noticed the wooden presentation case on the podium near Marcus's position. He did not ask about it immediately. He asked Marcus to tell the audience about himself. Marcus said, "My name is Marcus Delaney. I am 41 years old. I am a high school guidance counselor in Richmond, Virginia. I am a former staff sergeant with the 101st Airborne Division. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq." Steve nodded. He said, "We honor your service, Sergeant." The audience applauded for about 6 seconds. Steve moved on. He did not ask about the wooden case. The first face-off was won by Andre Delaney on a question about things people do when they can't fall asleep. The Delaneys scored 94 points. The second face-off was won by Rodrigo Reyes on a question about reasons people cry at movies. The Reyes family played through and scored 81 points. The third face-off was won by Tamara Delaney on a question about things people collect as hobbies. The Delaneys scored 67 points. Steve was in good form. The audience was engaged. Marcus Delaney was methodical. He answered when it was his turn. He smiled when it was appropriate to smile. He did not look toward the front row of the audience. The fourth face-off began at approximately 10:34 a.m. It was Marcus's turn at the buzzer, opposite a Reyes cousin named Isela. Before Steve could read the question, Marcus did something the floor manager had not been warned about. He stepped back from the buzzer. He turned to Steve Harvey. He said, loudly enough for the microphones to catch, "Mr. Harvey, before you read the next question, I need to ask you for permission to do something. Would you give me 30 seconds? Steve looked at Marcus. He looked at the wooden presentation case that Marcus was now picking up from the podium. He looked at the serious expression on Marcus's face. He said, "Sergeant, you take whatever time you need. The floor is yours." Marcus Delaney nodded. He said, "Thank you, sir." He walked, carrying the wooden case in both hands now, from the podium to the edge of the stage. He looked out into the audience for the first time since walking onto the set. He found the front row, seat 11. The 78-year-old woman in the navy blue dress, holding her small program book, looking up at the stage with mild curiosity, still not knowing. Marcus Delaney took a slow breath. The studio fell completely silent. "Mrs. Pemberton, ma'am, I don't know if you recognize me." Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton looked up at the stage. She adjusted her bifocals. She looked at the man in the dark suit holding the wooden case. She looked at his face. She looked at his eyes. She was still for about 4 seconds, and then her right hand came up to her mouth, slowly, the way a hand comes up when a woman is about to say something and has not yet found the words. "Marcus?" she said. "Yes, ma'am. It's me." "Marcus Delaney. My Marcus." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pemberton lowered her hand. She put both of her hands on the armrests of her seat, as though she were about to stand up. She did not stand. She stayed in her seat, but her eyes did not leave Marcus. Marcus Delaney turned from the front row of the audience back to face Steve Harvey. Steve was standing in the middle of the stage, very still, watching. Marcus spoke into the microphone. "Mr. Harvey, ma'am in the front row, audience, I need to take a few minutes to tell a story, if that's okay with the show." Steve Harvey said without hesitation, "Take all the time you need, son." Marcus Delaney turned to face the audience. He held the wooden presentation case in front of him with both hands. He began to speak. "My name is Marcus Delaney. When I was 12 years old, I was a seventh grader at Robert E. Lee Middle School in Lynchburg, Virginia. I could not read. I had been passed through 6 grades of school without anyone noticing, or anyone caring enough to notice, that I could not read. I was not a bad kid. I was a quiet kid. I had learned to hide it. I had learned to memorize the shapes of words well enough to fake my way through. I had never read a book. I had never read a chapter. I had never read a page. I thought I was stupid. I had accepted that I was stupid. My mother was a single mother working 2 jobs. She did not know. Nobody knew. And then I walked into Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton's 7th grade English class on the first day of school in September 1996. Marcus paused. His voice stayed steady, but something behind it was beginning to tighten. Mrs. Pemberton realized I could not read. I do not know how. She realized it within the first 3 weeks of class. She did not tell anyone. She did not embarrass me. She did not send me to a special classroom. She did not tell my mother. She kept me after class one day. She was alone in the room with me. She said, "Marcus, I think you and I have some work to do together, and I think we are going to do it." She worked with me after school for an hour every Tuesday and every Thursday for the entire 7th grade academic year. She never charged me. She never told anyone she was doing it. She never asked for thanks. By the end of the year, I was reading at a 10th grade level. The first complete novel I ever read was To Kill a Mockingbird. I finished it on a Tuesday afternoon in April 1997. I was 12 years old. I remember exactly what the weather was like that day. I remember the smell of her classroom. I remember she had a plant on the windowsill called a Christmas cactus. I remember she cried when I told her I had finished the book. I remember I did not understand, at 12 years old, why she was crying. I understand now. Marcus stopped. He looked down at the wooden case in his hands. He took another breath. On April 14, 2011, when I was 26 years old, I was serving in Afghanistan. At 6:15 that morning, I received a handwritten letter. I had not seen or spoken to Mrs. Pemberton in 14 years. She had tracked me down through my mother. She had written me a letter. 2 pages, yellow-lined paper. She said she had seen my name in the Lynchburg newspaper on a list of service members deployed overseas, and that she wanted to let me know she was praying for me. She said she remembered me. She said I had been one of the most important students of her career. I read that letter 3 times. I folded it carefully. I put it in the left breast pocket of my uniform, over my heart. At 6:45 a.m., I went on a vehicle patrol with 3 other soldiers. At 7:13 a.m., our vehicle hit an IED. The other 3 soldiers in my vehicle were killed. I was the only survivor. When the medical team examined me 14 hours later at Bagram, they found Mrs. Pemberton's letter in my chest pocket, with a piece of shrapnel embedded in it. The surgeon told me that the letter had deflected the shrapnel enough that it had not reached my heart. She said, in her professional opinion, the letter was the reason I was alive. Marcus paused. He did not look at Mrs. Pemberton yet. He kept his eyes on the wooden case. I should have thanked her 15 years ago. I should have driven to Lynchburg in 2011. I should have driven there in 2012, in 2013, in 2014. Every single year for 15 years, I told myself I would go and thank her next year. I kept not going. I did not know how to say what needed to be said. I did not think I had the right words. Then, in June 2025, I sat at a graduation ceremony, and I watched a student of my own thank me from a podium. And I realized that I had been doing for young people, for my entire adult career, what Mrs. Pemberton had done for me, and I had never told her, and that she was 78 years old, and that I had run out of next year's. Marcus lifted the wooden presentation case. He turned slowly to face the front row of the audience. Mrs. Pemberton was crying, silent tears. Her hands were folded in her lap over the small program book. Her eyes had not left Marcus for a single moment. Mrs. Pemberton, this flag was flown over Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khost Province, Afghanistan, on April 14, 2011. The day I should have died. The day your letter kept me alive. I had it flown that day with the permission of my commanding officer. I have kept it for 15 years. I did not know what to do with it. I did not know who it was for. I know now. This flag belongs to you. Ma'am, I am asking you if you will accept it from me. Marcus Delaney walked slowly down the 3 stairs that led from the stage into the audience pit. He walked to the front row. He stopped in front of seat 11. He knelt down on one knee on the carpeted floor. He lifted the wooden case. He held it out to Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton did not move her hands from her lap for about 6 seconds. Then she lifted them, slowly, both of them, and she placed them on top of the wooden case without taking it from him. She left her hands there. She looked at Marcus. She looked at the flag through the glass of the case. She looked back at Marcus. She said, in a voice so quiet that the boom microphone had to be boosted in post-production to catch it. Marcus, I did not know you made it home. Marcus's face broke. He had been holding himself together for 9 minutes on stage. He could not hold any more. He bent his head forward until his forehead rested against the glass of the case, which was now between his face and Mrs. Pemberton's hands, and he wept. Not loudly, not dramatically, the way a man cries when he has been carrying something for 15 years and has finally been allowed to put it down. Mrs. Pemberton lifted one of her hands from the case and placed it gently on top of Marcus's head. She held it there. She said, very quietly, "You were always going to make it home. I knew it when you were 12. The studio fell completely silent. Steve Harvey was standing at the edge of the stage, at the top of the 3 stairs, looking down at the front row. He had watched the entire thing. He had not interrupted. He had not spoken. His hands were hanging at his sides. Tears were running down his face in a way the camera operators would later say they had never seen on him before. Steve Harvey did something then that the crew had never seen him do in 17 years. He walked down the 3 stairs from the stage into the audience pit. He walked to the front row. He did not speak. He sat down on the carpeted floor next to Marcus Delaney, cross-legged, in his dark, tailored suit, in front of 207 audience members who had all risen to their feet, but who were still silent. He did not say anything. He just sat there, a 68-year-old man, the host of the show, sitting on the floor next to a 41-year-old veteran who was still kneeling, in front of a 78-year-old retired English teacher who was still holding one hand on his head. For approximately 2 minutes, nobody spoke. The cameras kept rolling. The 3 of them stayed there. Mrs. Pemberton's hand did not leave Marcus's head. Steve did not move. Nobody said anything. The Reyes family, watching from the stage, was holding each other and weeping openly. The audience remained on its feet. But the real story hadn't even started yet. When Marcus finally lifted his head, Mrs. Pemberton took the wooden case from his hands. She held it in her lap. She looked down at it. She ran one finger very gently across the glass, over the stars of the folded flag. She said, "I am going to put this on the wall above my reading chair, where I read every night, so I can see it when I read." Marcus nodded. He could not speak. Steve Harvey finally stood up. He helped Marcus to his feet. The 2 men stood in the audience pit. Steve looked at Mrs. Pemberton. Ma'am, may I ask your name? Ruth Ann Pemberton. Mrs. Pemberton, how long did you teach? 41 years. I retired in 2014. How many students did you teach to read, ma'am? Students who came into your classroom not reading. Mrs. Pemberton thought about this. I do not know exactly. Over the years, perhaps 40, perhaps 50. The ones who slipped through. I could always see them. I do not know why. I just could. So I worked with them after school. That is what teachers do, Mr. Harvey. Steve Harvey turned to face the camera that was nearest to him. He wiped his face. He spoke slowly. Everybody watching at home, please hear me. A 78-year-old retired English teacher from Lynchburg, Virginia, just told us that over her 41-year teaching career, she quietly, on her own time, after school, without pay, without recognition, taught approximately 40 to 50 children who had been passed through the school system without learning to read. She did this because she could see them. She said she does not know why. She said that is what teachers do. One of those children, Marcus Delaney, went on to serve 3 combat tours. One of her letters to him kept him alive in Afghanistan. He has spent 15 years trying to figure out how to thank her. He just thanked her on this stage, and I watched it. I watched her say to him, "You were always going to make it home. I knew it when you were 12. And now, I need to ask all of you watching at home a question. Who is the teacher who saw you? Who is the Mrs. Pemberton in your life? Because I guarantee you, somebody saw you the way she saw Marcus. And if that person is still alive, they deserve to hear from you. Today. Not next year. Today." Steve paused. He turned back to Marcus. "Sergeant Delaney, with your permission, I would like to use this moment for something bigger. I would like the foundation to start something today. I would like to call it the Teacher Thank You Project. We will build a system where people can find their teachers, if their teachers are still alive, and thank them. We will cover the costs. We will send letters. We will arrange visits. We will record thank you messages and deliver them in person. Because you are not the only one who ran out of next year's, son. There are millions of you, and we are going to fix that, starting today." Marcus Delaney nodded. He could not speak. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to Mrs. Pemberton. He knelt down again in front of her seat. "Mrs. Pemberton, the Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation would like to honor your 41 years of teaching by naming this project after you. It would be called the Ruth Ann Pemberton Teacher Thank You Project. It would exist to reconnect Americans with the teachers who changed their lives, while those teachers are still alive to hear it. Would you allow us to name it after you, ma'am?" Mrs. Pemberton looked at Steve Harvey. She looked at Marcus Delaney, still standing next to Steve. She looked down at the folded flag in her lap. "Mr. Harvey, I am a retired English teacher living on a pension in a small apartment in Lynchburg, Virginia. Nobody has ever offered to name anything after me before. I would be very honored. Yes." Steve Harvey stood up. He looked at Mrs. Pemberton. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the camera. He said, quietly, 5 words that would be quoted on evening news broadcasts across 40 countries. "This is why we're here." But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the Reyes family, who were still standing on the stage, weeping openly. He walked back up the 3 stairs. He stopped at the edge of the stage. He looked at Rodrigo Reyes. "Mr. Reyes, your family came here to play a game today. I know this is not what you signed up for, but I want to ask you something. You served your city as a firefighter for 34 years. Is there a teacher in your life who changed everything for you?" Rodrigo Reyes was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in a voice that was thick, "Mr. Harvey, my third-grade teacher, Mrs. Carmen Ortega. She is 81 years old. She lives in Tucson. I have not thanked her properly. Would your family agree to let the Reyes family's prize money today go toward the Ruth Ann Pemberton Teacher Thank You Project, so that people like Mrs. Ortega can be thanked by thousands of former students? And would you accept from the foundation an all-expenses-paid trip with your family to visit Mrs. Ortega in Tucson next month? Rodrigo Reyes stepped forward from his family's line. He did not speak for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "Mr. Harvey, my family agrees. All of it. Yes." The audience could not stay seated any longer, though they had been standing already. They began to applaud. The applause lasted 7 minutes. The episode aired 5 weeks later, on December 3, 2026. The broadcast was a special extended format, 60 minutes instead of 30. By the end of the first 48 hours, it had been viewed 87 million times on YouTube. By the end of the first week, 216 million across all platforms. The final Nielsen-verified number, 90 days after air, was 389 million views across 40 countries. The hashtag Mrs. Pemberton trended worldwide for 19 consecutive days. The hashtag Teacher Thank You trended for 44 consecutive days, a record for any hashtag tied to a single television segment. The Ruth Ann Pemberton Teacher Thank You Project was launched formally on December 5, 2026. 2 days after the episode aired. The foundation seeded the project with a $1 million commitment from Steve Harvey personally. Within 72 hours of the launch, the project had received 47,000 submissions from Americans asking for help locating teachers who had changed their lives. By the end of the first month, 142,000 submissions had been received. By the end of the first year, the project had successfully connected 240,000 Americans with their former teachers, either through letters, phone calls, or in-person visits arranged and funded by the foundation. Of those 240,000 teachers, 8,700 were over the age of 80. The project's internal research team, led by a former educational policy analyst named Dr. Althea Barrington, released a report in March 2028, estimating that the project had directly resulted in more than 340,000 thank you interactions between former students and the teachers who had taught them, with a median teacher age of 71. Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton remained in her small apartment in Lynchburg, Virginia, for the first 6 months after the taping. The folded flag hung above her reading chair, as she had said it would. In May 2027, at Marcus Delaney's invitation, she moved into a small in-law cottage that Marcus and Tamara had renovated behind their home in Richmond. She was 79 years old. Marcus's 2 children, Eli and Simone, called her Grandma Ruth. She read to them every evening. She lived with the Delaneys for the remaining 3 years of her life, cared for by Marcus and Tamara, until her peaceful death in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in April 2030 at the age of 82. The folded flag was given by Mrs. Pemberton in a will she had written in August 2027 back to Marcus Delaney, with instructions that it eventually be passed on to his son, Eli. It hangs above Eli Delaney's bed as of this writing. Marcus Delaney was interviewed by CBS News Sunday morning in February 2027. The correspondent, a veteran journalist named Lee Cowan, asked Marcus what he had learned from the 15 years he had waited to thank Mrs. Pemberton. Marcus thought about this for a long time before answering. Then he said, "Mr. Cowan, I learned that the people who change our lives often do it quietly, and they do not know they are doing it, and they do not expect to be thanked. And I learned that if we wait for the perfect way to thank them, we will wait until it is too late. There is no perfect way. There is only the way you can do it right now. You show up. You bring what you have. You say what you can say. You let it be imperfect. Because the person who needs to hear it does not need it to be perfect. They need it to exist. Steve Harvey was interviewed by Good Morning America in November 2027 on the one-year anniversary of the Teacher Thank You Project. He was asked what he had taken personally from the Pemberton segment. He said, "I took something I did not expect. I took the image of a 78-year-old woman placing her hand on top of a 41-year-old man's head in a way I had not seen since my own mother placed her hand on my head when I was a boy." Teachers are not just teachers. They are something closer to mothers and fathers for a lot of us. I have been thinking about my own fourth-grade teacher, Mrs. Donna Harvey, no relation. She saw me when nobody saw me. I called her in December 2026 after the taping. She was 86 years old. She remembered me. I spoke with her for 42 minutes. She died of a stroke 11 weeks later. I was the last of her former students to speak with her. I have thanked God every day since for that 42-minute phone call. Every day. On a warm Saturday afternoon in October 2027, exactly 1 year after the Family Feud taping, Marcus Delaney stood in his backyard in Richmond, Virginia, at a small grill, cooking hamburgers. His wife Tamara was setting the patio table. His son Eli, 10 years old, was climbing a tree. His daughter Simone, 7 years old, was drawing with chalk on the walkway. Mrs. Ruth Ann Pemberton, 79 years old, in a blue cardigan, sat in a lawn chair in the grass, reading a paperback novel. Next to her lawn chair, on a small wooden table, was a glass of iced tea and a small notepad. Every afternoon at 3 p.m., Mrs. Pemberton wrote a short letter on that notepad to one of her former students. She had resumed a practice she had let lapse after her husband's death in 2011. She wrote 1 letter per day. She mailed them herself from the mailbox at the corner of Marcus's street. She had no longer any illusion about whether she would get responses. Most of her former students were now in their 40s, 50s, 60s. She did not expect replies. She wrote anyway. Marcus had told her when she first moved in that she did not have to do anything productive anymore. She had smiled at him and said, "Marcus, I am a teacher. I do not know how to not do this. Leave me alone to do my work." That afternoon, she lowered her novel and looked across the yard at Marcus grilling. She said, loud enough for him to hear, "Marcus, supper smells good, dear." Marcus looked up from the grill. He smiled at her. He said, "Yes, ma'am." Sometimes, a 41-year-old veteran walks onto a game show stage carrying a folded flag and finally thanks a 78-year-old woman who taught him to read when he was 12. And the thank you turns out to be 15 years late and exactly on time. Sometimes the most important thing a host of a game show can do is walk down 3 stairs, sit on the carpeted floor in his tailored suit, and stay silent while something sacred happens between 2 people who have been waiting decades to find each other again. And sometimes, the quiet work of teachers, done after school, without pay, without recognition, for boys and girls who have been passed through the system without being seen, is the work that keeps men alive in Afghanistan 15 years later. And it is the work that changes the course of hundreds of thousands of American lives when it is finally, properly, thanked. If this story moved something in you tonight, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell so stories like Mrs. Pemberton's keep finding you. Share this video with somebody who had a teacher who saw them. And in the comments below, tell us the name of a teacher who changed your life, because this community would like to say their name tonight, so that one more teacher in the world knows their work was seen.